I just can't wait to see how they spin this.
War wasn't always the American way.
I don't blame people for being skeptical of any FBI narrative.
We have a mass noticing going on. This presidential administration hasn't enacted the agenda it campaigned on.
If wars can be started by lies,
peace can be started by truth.
No more war, no more debt, no more inflation,
and no more empire.
What's going on, Liberty Vaulters? Good to be back with you. I'm here with the head foreign policy aficionado, as I see him on foreign policy. That's Scott Horton. He is the creator and leader of the Libertarian Institute. He has the Scott Horton Academy. He's wearing the garb right now with his hat. He was, I think, the editorial manager, and I think still is, of antiwar.com, and it's a total pleasure to have him. He's been a friend for several years, and if you ask me, there's no one that knows more about U.S. foreign policy as it pertains to the entire world than Scott Horton. So, Scott, thanks for being with us today, and let us know what you're working on your academy lately.
Well, thanks very much for having me on, Dave. It's great to be with you here. Right now, I'm hard at work on the final edits for part 2 of my Cold War course. And so this is taking you all through the history of America's Eastern European policy since the end of the last Cold War in the late 1980s, basically walking you through the subjects of my book, Provoke. So I have my Terror War course as well as my new Cold War course there at the Academy, and almost done with part 2 of that.
That's awesome. And you have a lot of great people working with you to build those courses. I know some of them personally. You have, CJ Kilmer. You have all sorts of other people that are really great on their content areas working in collaboration with you. I think it's great. Everyone should check out the Scott Horton Academy. It's an amazing resource. Actually, if you look into that, you'll be way smarter than me on foreign policy. And it's because of Scott and his efforts and his managerial prowess and making sure that the right content that, let's just say, disrupts the standard narratives we heard growing up in government schools and really gives you the truth about some of this stuff. But I brought,
go
ahead.
I think we have an affiliate program going on, right? Where you get 10% off if you use the promo code Liberty Vault, or if you go to scotthortonacademy.com/Liberty Vault, then Dave will get his kickback and you guys will get your discount on membership to the Academy as well.
Dude, I love it. I actually didn't realize that, but I'm going to put that in every single one of my future videos, and I can talk about that now too. So this is news to me, but yeah, I would love to push that product and totally stand behind it. So thanks for that, Scott. We'll do that. I did want to bring you here to talk about foreign policy, but first, kind of as it ties into foreign policy tangentially, I did want to get your take on the Epstein files and what you think are some of the craziest revelations. I'm just going to display some things I think are interesting. Number one, we know that Epstein was in, correspondence with a Rothschild to see how he could profit from the Ukraine upheaval, saying that it presents many opportunities, and the Rothschilds have benefited from the Ukraine side, as I'm sure you know. You have this one from Joey Ito saying, hey, I want help trying to get a friend out of prison in Syria. Do you have any influence that would allow that? Epstein says not for email. Joey Ito headed the MIT Media Lab. And then here's one more, and then we'll get your take, Scott, that I thought was interesting. This one might be hard for my audience to see, but it looks like Steve Bannon at least implied that Epstein might have the goods to take out Steve Mnuchin, then the Treasury Secretary of Trump's first administration, or Jerome Powell, the current Fed chair that's going to be displaced, perhaps implying he had the goods to take these guys down. Might be blackmail, might not be, but what did you think were some of the most interesting revelations that came from the latest tranche?
Well, I have to admit, I have not been just diving deep into the things. I know there's this jmail.com where you can basically log in. It's like a clone of his Gmail account, and you can just troll through all of his emails. On stuff like this, I really wish Justin Raimondo was still alive to do, the original dive through the stuff. I have been scrolling through Twitter and sort of looking at people's first finds here. It seems like, I guess my overall kind of new understanding, Dave, if things have changed, would be maybe it's not so much that he was just like, tricking guys into screwing underage girls and then saying, aha, I got you. Now you're blackmailed and work for Israel, whether you like it or not, kind of thing, like maybe people suspected. But he certainly was getting people laid all the time with whoever they were interested in, apparently. He was sort of maybe like an overlord of different pimps or something like that, kind of. But it seems to be all in service of like greasing the skids of these relationships. So maybe it's not so much blackmail as just, well, you would never screw me over, not after that fun weekend we had where I know things about you and you know things about me, or where, that kind of thing, where it's not necessarily that explicit, but it serves sort of the same purpose, right? Of keeping people in line, that they sort of owe this guy a favor. He knows things about them that they wish, he didn't, or that kind of thing. But then also I think what I've learned is that he played a much bigger role in American and Western political society than that. He was from, pimp overlord. He was there working with these guys on all kinds of projects, which, I think we've really been finding this out over recent months with the reporting by Ryan Grimm and the horrible Murtaza Al-Qaeda, who I hate over there. But I do respect Ryan Grimm. And they had this leak that apparently the Iranians hacked Ehud Barak's emails. And so they got a bunch of stuff on Epstein from there. And they had been working on his ties with Israel, working with Russia, working with Syria, working with, was it Sierra Leone or one of these things?
Mongolia and the Ivory Coast and security agreements. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yes. So that we've been kind of finding out more and more about that. But this really, we're finding much more about his role. And, I just thought this was funny. I don't know if you can relate to this or not, but to me, it was just, what can I say, man? In the 1990s, when I was, in high school and in my early 20s, I was like a New World Order conspiracy kook, right? And the heart of that stuff is basically like the John Birch Society conspiracy, the grand design, as G. Edward Griffin calls it, to build a one world government under the United Nations and all of that. And at the core of it all is the Rockefellers and the Council on Foreign Relations, all that. Well, I don't know if you saw this, but one of the first things I saw was where Epstein sits down with Steve Bannon. And his whole first thing is how he worked with, starting in the late 70s, he started working with David Rockefeller at the founding of the Trilateral
Commission. Yeah.
Where the purpose of it, you understand, is because democracy creates too much instability. And so we wanted to have this kind of permanent organization for tying the establishments of Western Europe, the United States, and Japan together to create this sort of form of this permanent stability, which in fact, that was the big Trilateral Commission study at the time, was the crisis of democracy. When the people have too much say, then they do things that are against the interests of the Rockefellers and their peers. And so that's the problem. And that's why we need to do things like create the Trilateral Commission in the first place. But then I swear to God, in the next sentence, Dave, he starts sounding like G. Edward Griffin himself in The Creature from Jekyll Island. Now he's not talking about the Rockefeller conspiracy, or first he's saying, yeah, I'm part of it. Now he's Ed Griffin saying, let me explain to you how the Federal Reserve System allows for fractional reserve banking and the fraudulent expansion of bank credit and what a horrible scam it is. And so it just, I had a little bit of conspiratard whiplash there about like who this guy is and what role he plays. And things like, if you listen to the way he explains fractional banking to Bannon, he's not saying, hey, here's how we do it. He's saying, geez, Steve, you'd never believe it. It's horrible, right?
Yeah.
He sounds like if you were explaining it to me.
Yeah, I know. Man.
Yeah, it's really something. And anyway, beyond that, whatever, he's in bed with princes and CEOs and university professors and staffers and politicos and congressmen and people of just all over the place. And of course is in bed 100% tight with Ehud Barak, the former, first of all, head of military intelligence, and then defense minister, and then prime minister, and then defense minister again of Israel over there. And worked with him to help him get jobs and all of this stuff, to help him make money after leaving power. Um, and then I guess one other thing that's on my mind about it is a lot of what we still don't know. I don't know if, again, I haven't really been doing, I'm always fighting the last war. I'm sitting here working my stupid audio book of a book I published a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
But it seems like there's still kind of open, unanswered questions about who all was going to that island and what all was happening there. And the same thing for the ranch out in New Mexico. You barely hear anything about that. It's easy.
Yeah, I don't think the feds ever
on.
raided that property either.
Right. Yeah, I had read a tweet about that. And so then, it seems like all the stories about all of the rich, powerful people coming in and out of his place in New York City. It seems like there's not as much of that in Florida. It seems like that's where maybe much of the actual abuse of minors took place. But I don't know who all he invited to participate down there. That seemed like it was mostly just him and his girlfriend doing that. But then in these emails, some of them are kind of joking around. Some of them you can't tell who's just trolling and who's being sincere and what all these things mean exactly. You know what I mean? But some of them really seem to be explicit references to, boy, sure had fun abusing kids with you yesterday, Jeff, or, stuff, whatever. That's a very poor paraphrase, but you know what I mean? Some of those don't really seem like jerking around. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I'm glad you brought up drop site news. I reference them frequently for the connections that Epstein had to Israel. You spoke to some of them. There's also records that Epstein was communicating via his Gmail account with a known spy named Yoni Koren in Israel, talking about wire exchange information. He drafted at least one full speech for Ehud Barak when he was the foreign minister. It's like, what the hell was this? This is like the undeniable proof that he was tied in some way into the political apparatus in ways we didn't know. You're right. He mentions fractional reserve banking. He called it fractionalized banking. And hey, we're both radical libertarians. If there's one guy that we don't want to make the pitch for our economic views
Right.
of the banks, it's Epstein. But I'm with you. It was kind of like a whiplash. So yeah, there's more to come, more documents to sift through. We don't know all the answers, but we've gotten so much on the Israel connection side and not as much necessarily on the direct blackmail side, though I would argue some of it implies at least indirect blackmail. Do you think that's right? Or what other things do you think might come from future releases?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seemed to be, I'm not exactly clear on what was the form of this email. I read one news report characterize it as Epstein drafting an email for someone else to send to Bill Gates.
He was sent to
blackmailing
himself.
him.
It was sent to himself, but in the description it said Bill, comma, and then here's the message. So it's like he was documenting it for his own records that he might send it to Gates in the future if he ever wanted to use that leverage. That's just my gut, but you're right. There's something odd about the fact that he did that, but sent it to himself and not Gates.
Yeah, and I think it was the Wall Street Journal that named the person that he had drafted it on behalf of. Or something.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly. It's so much, man.
Yeah.
But in there, that's the one with the thing about the wife and all that. And which, by the way, I read a thing that said they asked her about that on NPR News, and she did not dismiss it. She said, "Well, you'll just have to find out more about that from him." But she did not say, "Oh, don't now. That's silly. Me and him have had our problems, but that would never happen." She didn't say that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And then, look, I think there are a lot of names in there of people who are about to be much more famous than they ever were. You know what I mean? That so-and-so professor, there was this guy who's giving, Epstein's asking him explicitly, is there like a federal law against crossing state lines in order to have sex with someone because in that state, the age of consent is lower? And he's like, no, you're all in the clear, pal, says his friend from Harvard Law School or whatever it is. Like, so a lot of these people are, maybe this Justice Department isn't going to do a thing about them, but they are going to, suffer complete destruction of their careers and reputations. Overseas, it's hit worse. The foreign minister of Slovakia had to resign. There's former business
people
minister,
resign
I
in
guess
other
they call it.
countries, but not in our own if they're connected to Epstein, right? Like,
And did you see President Trump today was like, nah, I don't want to know about this. I like Bill and Hillary Clinton. I hope they don't say anything bad about me in front of Congress. And I just think justice has more important things to do than this right now. Like, man, that sure does not sound very persuasive. You know, Batya Sungar, whatever the killer lady, she got up there and on CNN or whatever it was and says, listen, the American people are not interested in this, okay? This is just an obsession of a few right-wing and left-wing cranks. So somebody posted that on the Twitters. So I just asked Grok, and this is something that I think Grok could be reliable for. Hey, Grok, what's the latest polling data on Americans' interest in this story? And it's all through the roof, dude. It's all 85% of everyone wants to know more now and are not satisfied with as the quantity that has been released yet and whatever. So just the level of spin here. Did you see Ted Cruz and his big Freudian slip of stop investigating pedophiles? He says, we gotta make a pledge for the honor of this country to not look into the worst aspect of the people who hold all the power. Remember, John McCain's wife said, oh, we all knew what Epstein was up to. We all knew, but we were afraid to say anything about it. And of course, John McCain was the most powerful senator, probably out of all of them for the last 25 years or whatever. You know, overall, if you balance it out, tied with Biden anyway, you know, why would his wife be afraid? You know, she got busted, you know, using false prescriptions to get opiates, the kind of thing that if she was poor and brown, she'd gone straight, or maybe poor and white, would have gone straight to the penitentiary for. And she's above the law. She's Cindy McCain, dude. She wasn't even threatened with probation for forging prescriptions to get illegal opiates, dude. Why would she be afraid of a guy like Epstein? Apparently he's kind of scary. And you know what I mean? I don't know. But anyway, I'm sorry. I should wrap up on this, but let me just say, I guess, to reiterate, my main takeaway is this guy was way further tied in with more powerful people and played apparently much more detailed and sophisticated roles in the way that he interacted with these people in whatever it was that they were up to. Apparently he was even part of switching Bitcoin from a currency to more of an asset. That was the big civil war that Roger Ver got kicked out of Bitcoin
block
over.
Wars, yeah.
So apparently, like, you know, this guy's just got his fingers in everything, and it's much further than I would have expected. I just thought he was, you know, Shorty the pimp up there. You know what I mean? Who knew that it was all this crazy stuff? So.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that's an excellent takeaway. You referenced jmail.world, and I agree. I'm going to tell my audience right now, I have it on my screen here. This is how you can do a lot of research on Epstein and who he was talking to in his Gmail account on the left side.
Like it's just like you're logged into his account and you can just troll through like the sickest voyeur and look at what this freak was into.
Yeah, here's the Elon Musk correspondence. You have Peter Thiel. You have all sorts of stuff. You know, he's talking to people about Palantir and the promises they could offer for lucrative business deals. There's so much stuff here, and there's too much to really get into. But, Scott, I largely agree with you. We'll have to see what comes from future releases. Supposedly there's like 2 million documents left. But jmail.world is a great place where my audience can go and look at the email portions, which I think are, I would say, is like much more substantive than a lot of like the FBI tip line stuff.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
You know what it is too? Here's the big fight that's coming up, and that's going to stay. The pressure, this is not going to go away, is to undo those redactions of the people who sent and received those emails. The redactions were supposed to be to protect the name of victims.
Yes.
Not people who emailed Jeffrey Epstein, said, boy, I sure had fun victimizing people with you over the last few days there. See you next week in Monaco or whatever. Those names need to be revealed.
Yes, they are going beyond the scope of law to over-redact beyond what the discharge petition calls for. Massey's been calling it out. Some heroic people are calling it out, but not enough. And I hope they don't get away with this. Or if they do get away with this, that a future attorney general might be like, yeah, they were totally corrupt in dealing with this, and maybe we'll get that in the future. But that's an absolutely great point.
One more thing.
Yeah.
One more thing there, too, is the references, and I don't know the numbers, but it's apparently like a pretty significant number of references to pizza and grape soda and stuff that is a throwback to the Podesta emails and some of this obviously coded language. Now, we don't know exactly what it's coded for, but it's definitely coded language for getting away with murder here some way, one way or another. And I think we got a pretty good idea of what they're referencing there.
Totally agree. It sheds new light on Pizzagate, not necessarily like a front of a pizza shop serving as, a sex trafficking organization, but even the FBI, and I looked this up, Scott, has acknowledged that at least 2 sexual offenders have used the term pizza to relate to those types of crimes. So this is the FBI even adhering to that part of it, and we see more of the coded language. But I do want to move into the next topic, though. That I'm so glad we covered so many of the bases there. I want to talk about this potential looming regime change with Iran, or a looming military strike, the USS Abraham Lincoln and other assets, F-35s, etc., being moved into the region. But that seems to have maybe been derailed because several powers like Saudi Arabia and the Turks have raised concerns that, hey, we don't want, economic warfare and destruction going on through a war here. And Trump seems to be entertaining maybe a new phase of talks with the Iranians. What do you think's going on here? And would the Iranians even trust the U.S. after getting completely duped in the last round of negotiations that ended up with a collusion scheme with Netanyahu and then bombing?
Worry hard, but hope for the best here, Dave. I mean, look, the reality is, despite all the hype, the Ayatollah is essentially an extremely conservative and reasonable guy when it comes to his foreign policy dealings, and particularly with the United States. They say he's an aggressor in the region, but all he ever did really was accept Christmas gifts that George W. Bush handed him. You know what I mean? You're saying you're giving me Baghdad? Fine, I'll take it. You know what I mean? But he didn't start that war. That was America that started that war. And really, Iran's support for the Houthis is always, in Yemen has always been vastly overblown and that kind of thing. So in terms of like picking a fight with the United States, Iran is not interested in one at all. And I was really skeptical that there was going to be a war last June, because I just thought, look, the Ayatollah don't want to fight. How do you start a war against a country that's going, I don't want to fight you, dude? Well, you just get Israel to go ahead and do it, I guess, is what happened last June. Where I thought that, there would still be talks. They were saying, yeah, we're scheduled for talks this Sunday, so don't worry, and then they started bombing on Friday. Yeah. Now here they were scheduled for talks. I'm sorry, I'm spacing. Was it? I think
Friday,
one in Oman. Yeah, and then
in Oman.
Yeah, there were supposed to be 2 different ones, and they canceled like the big talks I think in Turkey, but they're going to keep the ones in Oman, which are going to be lower level talks, but like at least they're talking. But see, the thing is with Trump, man, is he's so full of it that can work to Peace's advantage too, because on one hand he can say on Tuesday, no enrichment or I'll kill you. And then on Wednesday, he can say, you heard me, no nuclear weapons, right? Well, the Ayatollah, hell, the Shah signed a deal promising Iran would never get nuclear weapons called the Non-Proliferation Treaty back in 1968. And they reaffirmed that in the JCPOA of 2015, that they completely forswear nuclear weapons anyway. So if you want that deal, you can have it, pal. Even with a gun to their head, they don't care. They'll sign that. You know what I mean? So the question is really like whether Trump is going to back down. Rubio, on one hand, speaking out of one side of the administration's mouth, says they cannot even have missiles that can reach Israel. Yeah. So you have to either let us, either we're going to bomb you now, or I guess the better way to put it, you have to allow Israel to bomb you and give up any means of defending yourself against them, or we're going to bomb you now. You're going to get bombed by them later. So that's completely crazy. Or at least it should be understood not as crazy, but as a deal made to be rejected and as an excuse for war if they won't give into that. But I would be amazed. I got to tell you, it is possible, but I would be amazed if the Ayatollah is going to give up enrichment now. Although I have to say, though, really last June, Donald Trump did call his bluff, bomb the crap out of Fordo and Natanz and Isfahan. So that took their 2 major enrichment facilities offline and their conversion facility where you go from metal to gas back to metal again, Without the conversion facility,
that's what makes the yellow cake, right?
Or it's what takes the yellow cake kind of, which is like partially refined ore, converts that to uranium hexafluoride gas. And then, in fact, there's another step in there where you got to refine it to purer ore. Then you convert it to uranium hexafluoride gas. That's what you spin in your centrifuges to enrich it up to a higher purity uranium-235. Then you got to convert it back into metal again to make anything out of it, fuel rod or bomb fuel or anything else. So without that conversion facility, and with Fordo and Natanz delivered severe setbacks, it would be rational for the Ayatollah to admit that his bluff has been called, that he doesn't really have the ability to reconstitute the program in any reasonable amount of time. And he's dealing with a completely unreasonable president who is not willing to tolerate any enrichment whatsoever on the Israeli standard, that any enrichment is equivalent to them making nuclear weapons, and so intolerable. And so what are you going to do with the United States of America if you're the Ayatollah, right? You're going to appease us and appease us and appease us till you can't appease no more. Because what the hell else is he going to do, Dave? Start a fight or give Trump a really good excuse to start one with him? So I really don't know what's going to happen there. On one hand, they have said this is just a pure matter of pride and of national sovereignty and of just energy independence, that they want to burn their uranium and sell their oil, and that they cannot be told by any third power, read the United States of America, that they cannot enrich uranium, and damn it, they're going to enrich uranium. For them to give that up now after 25 years of this or 20 years of this would be hugely, significant. On the other hand, if their program is that severely degraded anyway, and they are truly being threatened with full-scale war and even regional war, then it's possible that they could sign, but you hear what the war party is saying. They're denouncing any talks. That's what Barack Obama would do, is negotiate. You can't do that. You have to fight. You have to start this war. And the thing is, let me say this. Also, I should hedge because I really don't know. Like I say, the Ayatollah is an extremely conservative guy. So if he knew he was going to die, the Americans are coming, the game is regime change, they're sure to drop a bomb on his head next. Is he going to order their military to go all out and do everything they can to hit American targets in the region? Or is he just going to lay down and die? Now, like academically or whatever in the textbook, any government is going to bring the whole damn country down fighting with them, right? What government is going to sacrifice itself for the good of the country and let a foreign nation take over their country, but just, well, whatever, I still want to preserve the lives of my people, right? That's not how governments act. Governments will fight and even when they're going to lose anyway, kind of thing. So without knowing for sure what he's going to do, it's only reasonable to suspect that if the entire regime is threatened, the military and the rest is threatened, that they're going to launch everything they've got. And we've got people at risk in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in UAE, Saudi, and Bahrain, all up and down that Gulf. We got air bases and naval bases. And of course, we still have troops in Iraqi Kurdistan. I was reading a thing where it's probably the Wall Street Journal. Yes, it was the Wall Street Journal, where they're saying, look, the plan has got to be to let the military know that we will support you if you turn on the Ayatollah. If we start bombing the Iranian regime, and we got to tell the Iranian military, now's your chance to rid yourself of this problem. Now, I can see from the grin on your face that yeah, that don't sound right. You know what I mean? Why would they? Now, I guess if they're all just facing execution by J-Dam, and it's just, here come the B-52s to level Tehran, maybe they would give in to that. But we saw what happened last June. The Israelis killed a bunch of senior commanders. Then they made phone calls to the next guys in line at their home and said, we're going to kill your families if you don't turn on the regime. And not a single one of them did. Not a single one of them did. So the idea that, whatever, this isn't Iran, but it's a close enough comparison. We live in a country. Imagine some foreign power murdering our civilian leaders and then telling the Pentagon, bow down to us or you're next. What would the Pentagon do? They would launch, man. They're not going to bow down to our new Chinese overlords. They're going to fire something hot, if not H-bombs. They're going to blow up something. They're not just going to do nothing. So I think, Trump, and who knows like what kind of back channel communication they had last June. But remember, when America bombed Fordo and Isfahan, they said, I guess the Israelis hit Natanz, maybe Americans hit Natanz too, but they talked. There was a back channel there where the Ayatollah said, and Trump even acknowledged this in a tweet on the Truth Social there, that thanks Ayatollah for calling ahead and telling us that you were about to fire these missiles at our base so that we could shoot them down in time. You know what I mean? So that clearly happened. We dropped 14 bombs. They fired 14 missiles and then said, look, we don't want to escalate. They kept hitting Israel. They said, we don't want to fight the United States of America, Donald Trump. Don't make us fight you, dude. We don't want to fight you. And then he accepted that as good enough. Remember, the same thing happened after he killed Soleimani in his first term. They fired rockets at the missiles at an empty corner of an American base in Iraq. And then he let them have the last word and said, all right, you know what? No harm, no foul, even though some guys did have concussions, but no one was killed. And so he let that, die down at that point. So sorry to wrap up. Then let me say one last thing. And this pertains to Venezuela, which we may not have time to address here, but importantly, as famously, right, that thing went off without a hitch, man. They made whatever phone calls they needed to make to whoever they needed to make, and they used whatever jamming equipment they needed to jam, and they went in there and plucked the head of state and his wife out of there like it was an Afghan night raid in some dusty village with no electricity in Helmand province somewhere. And so from Donald Trump's point of view, man, that's like he cast a magic spell and it came true, right? That is like, or he's just has in his Delta Force the most capable group of men ever to do tasks, right? And he just have them do things, and apparently they can just do whatever his will is, right? So that could get you really high on imperial hubris to have that much authority where Delta's your private army. And boy, and they pull it off, man. Not like Waco where everybody dies, but like, man, they did this one, or Mogadishu 93. Here they pulled it off. So you could see Trump getting kind of drunk on that hubris. Right. But the one counter to that, though, is that he did this lengthy interview with the New York Times. He's always trying to impress those guys. They sent 3 or 4 reporters to the Oval Office for a 2-hour interview. And he went on and on. But one crucial part of that was he brought up Operation Eagle Claw, which was when Jimmy Carter tried to rescue the hostages in Iran in 1979. And the planes and the helicopters all crashed into each other in the desert. And it was, I think, 8 people died. And it was a big foobar, total catastrophe, led to the total reorganization of American Special Operations Forces and the aftermath and everything else. And Trump talked about that and said, it could have been Eagle Claw. Remember how bad that was? And remember how bad it was for Jimmy Carter? But not me, not this time. It was great. But boy, was I taking a big risk there. This could have gone really wrong. So like, I would have, maybe a better example of it going really wrong would be Iraq War II or something like that. But still, that was the risk he was taking, was that this could go bad and it could hurt him. And so you look at trying to do a regime change war in Iran, where Operation Eagle Claw actually happened. Right now, you're guaranteed Eagle Claws, right? You're virtually guaranteed American casualties in the Gulf, possibly planes shot down and guys killed. And how about when you parachute the Monarch in there and then the locals string him up, and now you don't have anyone to replace the Ayatollah with. And now you have to try to send in the 82nd Airborne to secure Tehran and install a new regime. Donald Trump doesn't want that trouble. Someone has, I don't know who, but somebody up there has got to be reminding him. Iran is 3 times the size of Iraq and 4 times the population and with mountains. And they have not been under sanctions and bombing this whole time. They haven't been at war since 89. And, we can start a fight with them, but it's virtually impossible to tell you how we can win one here unless you really just trust the Israelis when they say, as long as we go between 8 and 9 on a Thursday, we know that we can get the Ayatollah at his favorite spaghetti place. And then from there, it's smooth sailing. We promise that we're going to drop the monarch in there, maybe with a detachment of MEK cultists for his right flank. And then, it's going to work. But I don't know how anyone at like state or CIA or defense actually believes that, right? They can't really believe that. They can't be telling him, "Oh, yes, sir, this will be fun." Why not do Persia? We don't know what you're waiting for, Your Highness. Like, it can't be that they're encouraging him. I don't know.
I think you're right. I think some people that are close to him, even closer to him than they've ever been, like Lindsey Graham, all they do is stroke his ego, use imperial hubris to try to push him over the edge and support it. But you're right. The real analysts that look at these things and the success rate can't be thinking that this will be fulfilled by just bombings without funding a rebel group or with boots on the ground. One thing you said I do want to touch on is, Iran clearly doesn't want this war. And if the war party is still propagandizing to that extent, just look back to the 12-day war. Even when they were backed into the corner by both Israel and the United States, they tipped off Trump. Hey, we're not going to hit your guys, man. And that gave Trump the off-ramp. I was happy about that because in a way I was glad about the propaganda coming out of the Trump administration. You touched on that. They said, like, hey, we set back their program decades, and it seemed like we wouldn't be back. But Trump just keeps getting steered back there, it seems like, from the Israel lobby, where that was the impetus at first, their nuclear weapons program that Tulsi Gabbard said didn't exist just like 6 weeks prior, to then, they can't have ballistic missiles now. Their only defense against the preemptive Israeli strike. To then, if they kill protesters, we're going to bomb them too. To if they try anything, we're going to bomb them. It just seems like the goalpost keeps moving and moving to match the inevitability of war just because the war party wants it. Do you think that's wrong? Or is that right?
That is basically right. It is right. Like, they're flailing around for an excuse, right? We're here. We're trying to protect the protesters. We're trying to stop nukes. Rubio. They can't have drones. They can't have missiles or drones that can reach Israel. I mean, think of how dumbed down that argument is compared to Iraq War II, where this was pure lies. But the lies were Saddam might nuke your hometown. Saddam has got a warehouse or maybe multiple warehouses full of sarin and VX. And we think also anthrax. Remember when somebody attacked us with anthrax? That might have been him. And he could give the sarin and VX and Tabin and anthrax to Al-Qaeda to use against the United States. And they're planning it and plotting it now. And we have to preempt their attack on the United States homeland before it's too late, Dave. Right now they're going, if Iran has drones that can reach Israel, then we have the right to start a preemptive defensive war against them. And because that's what we're going to call it. Like, I'm sorry, Colin Powell is rolling over in his grave here, right? This is preposterous. And the same Rubio admits that we have no plan for the day after. We have no one to replace the Ayatollah with. In other words, we don't think that we could put the Shah Reza Pahlavi's son in there. And no, we don't think that Rudy Giuliani is right, that no, we need to put the Mujahideen cult, communist terrorist cult in instead. That actually we don't have a plan. And that could be a polite way of saying our plan is chaos. Our plan is to destroy Iran as a country and let them all kill each other as much as possible.
Isn't that what Israel wants? Just destabilization like Syria, and they don't really care about what comes next? But do you think that is their end game, that they really don't care what regime replaces it? They just want destabilization?
That's a good question. I mean, if you look at the Yannan plan or even kind of at the Clean Break and Coping with Crumbling States by David Wormser, there's, their kind of basis of understanding of all of this stuff is that all of these nations in the Middle East, I guess even Persia, these nations are all artificial. These are tribal warrior folk, and they could be subdivided down into much smaller warring tribes. And so then the Yannan plan is much more explicit about it than Coping with Crumbling States. But essentially, wouldn't it be easier for Israel if all of their enemies were just barefoot Arabs with AK-47s compared to actual state armies with armored divisions and air forces and tax bases and things that could pose a real threat to them in any way. And so, yeah, on the other hand, like even if you look at Iraq War II was supposed to be easy, but then it wasn't. So then plan B was, well, let's just blow the place up then and make sure that, you know, if the Shiites are going to be closer to Iran than to the United States, well, then let's just make sure they only get a third of Iraq instead of all of it, you know, basically that kind of thing. And that they helped then to divide the Sunni and Shia Arabs and all that through the civil war there when they realized that they're not going to have their way. And which, by the way, I didn't mention this, but it should be mentioned when I talk about we have all our forces within missile range in the Gulf and without the ability to shoot all of these missiles down, maybe some, but not all. But it isn't just that. It's also that we have essentially all the Shiites in the region, especially in Iraq, are under the influence of the Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani. And you could have whatever American forces in Iraq could not just be killed by missiles, but they could be stabbed in the back like Order 66 style, where we still have guys who are embedded with the Iraqi army. Although they say they're closing that down and moving all of the last of our guys to Kurdistan, but you could still have Shiite forces invade Iraqi Kurdistan and Kataib Hezbollah, which is a group which is close to Iran, like a semi-private, call it an NGO type militia next to the Iraqi army, but backed by the Iranians. They've already sworn that they will go to war against Americans in Iraq in the event of a war with Iran. This was a big thing that discouraged W. Bush from doing this back in 2007.
Yeah,
we still had 150,000 guys.
Cheney was still trying to push him for that, right? At the end of the presidency. Oh,
and then, but the military said that it was the leaders of the Badr Brigade and the Mahdi Army had both said that, I believe the quote from the commander of the Badr Corps was, "We will do our duty," which means kill their American allies. It was like the Order 66 analogy, where you have the Americans with the Jedi leading the army of clones, the Americans with the army troops leading armies of Shiite soldiers against their Sunni enemies in the Civil War. So, but then at the drop of Ayatollah Palpatine back in Tehran, they would all shoot our guys in the back. And so that was one of the reasons that W. Bush choked and decided not to pick that fight then. I don't know if there's anyone, like, honestly, man, like you could probably attribute that to Stephen Hadley, he really was Cheney's guy, and he was a bad guy and really helped push us into Iraq. But I think also he's got like an IQ in the 130s or 40s or something. And so like at some point he decided like he does owe the president the best advice he could give him. Like, well, sir, actually this might not. And I don't want to give Hadley too much credit, but I suspect it was him that talked Bush out of going that far.
That's the perfect way to transition, because you're right. Bush was talked out of, a regime change operation or military strikes against Iran at the end of his term. But what he wasn't dissuaded from was entertaining at the Bucharest summit the entry of Georgia and Ukraine into NATO. And that's our next subject, right? So we're really almost 16 years into a civil war between forces in Ukraine and forces in Russia. I use the 2014 date because that's the non-propaganda term that history began, when Putin invaded, right? But okay, so here's what I want to ask you. It seems like since the beginning of 2025, there's been a status quo in terms of territorial domination by Russia, holding something like 85 or 90% of the Donbass, the 4 Donbass provinces, and of course, Crimea. But what I wanted to ask you is this New START treaty that just expired. I know you're probably following this. My inkling is that even though Trump has suggested, we would like to potentially renew New START and enter into negotiations, hey, let's bring the Chinese into it too and make it a trilateral agreement. My suspicion is that that's the neocons pushing him to do this, to create a new arms race, a new Cold War of sorts that expands even to East Asia too. Do you think that's a misread in my perspective, or do you think there's something else at play here?
Well, no, I ain't saying you're wrong about that. I mean, first of all, I have to mention, because it goes back to our first topic too, that William Burns, who advised Bush not to make the Bucharest Declaration in 2008, was a buddy of Jeffrey Epstein's. And we've got these guys together. And people like me like to cite William Burns telling Condoleezza Rice to tell George Bush, don't do it, man. You're going to ruin everything if you do this. And then, but it turns out, yeah, he's tied to Epstein too. So there you go.
The reddest of red lines, but
I know it. And then, yes, that is, a huge part of what led to the war, right? It's all in the book, but it's all at the Academy.
Here's the book. This is the book
go.
My audience needs to learn more about this, but go for it, Scott.
And it is all in there, I promise. But so that is a huge part of what led to the outbreak of the Civil War, as you mentioned, was started in 2014 and has been raging ever since then. I think you're right about the status quo. I would say, to me, the status quo in terms of the fighting on the ground has really been the same since 2023, where that was the last time Ukraine really even tried an offensive.
Yeah.
But then they lost Bakhmut, and then shortly after that, at the beginning of 24, God, help me with my timeline, was Avdiivka. They lost Avdiivka, I believe, in early 24. And then and it's been just slow and steady, Russia advancing and Ukraine slowly retreating since then, with a couple of exceptions. They made their big move into Kursk, which turned out to have just been a big waste. And, they've made some moves like pushing back Russian forces in the north a bit. But by and large, up and down the line, it's been, the slow and steady Russian advance there. And so they're winning. And I think the war is going to continue because the Russians are winning, but they have not taken all that they have claimed, not by a long shot. And the Ukrainians are losing, but they don't want to quit until they've lost, because they still have all this territory that they're still standing on that the Russians have claimed. And so it's just trying to call time out in the middle of that brawl is just not going to work. You need to go back and prevent the war from breaking out in the first place, and too late for that. As far as the nukes go, I think Trump has always really had in mind big ideas about nuclear weapons, and particularly about nuclear weapons treaties. I think he is at least somewhat sincere. The problem is it's all imperial courtiers in his ear, from the arms industry, from the Pentagon, from allies, and from whoever. There are all these other considerations. Got Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor.
That's the recipe for disaster right there. You just said it.
Right, man. It makes it very difficult. So, really, he committed just a horrific crime against humanity in tearing up that INF treaty last time. This was Reagan's great achievement of 87 that kept all short, intermediate, and mid-range missiles, or mid and intermediate range missiles, out of Europe from 1988 on. And now it's legal to reintroduce them, although neither side has yet. Now we still have nuclear weapons in Europe, but only airdropped, gravity bombs, no cruise missiles, even air-fired cruise missiles allowed. So for Trump to tear that up was just the height of folly. And the Russians have said, look, we're going to go ahead and still abide by it anyway, even though, supposedly they were breaking it because they had developed a mid-range missile, but they weren't deploying it in Europe. They were deploying it along their frontier with China. And so, which is why America wanted intermediate range missiles too. That's why America wanted out of that treaty. So we could ring China from the Philippines and whatever, with medium range missiles. So America and Russia both let this INF treaty die that kept missiles out of Europe so we could move them to Asia. Anyway, and for the part that America played in that, and they really were the responsible party, and the Russians reacting. Now with this New START treaty, Dave, this is the last outstanding treaty that limits the development, creation, stockpiling, and deployment of nuclear weapons in the United States and Russia. All this SALT 1 and SALT 2 and START 1 and START 2, all these things are gone. New START is the last one, and it's already expired, or it's expiring, and the Russians are saying we want to stay in the thing. Now, go back to 1 year ago when Donald Trump was first inaugurated again for his second term. And remember, he was doing those kind of marathon press conferences in the Oval Office, sort of just to demonstrate that Biden could not do that and he could. So he was sitting there holding these long press conferences. And you'll probably recall that at one point he mused and said, you know what we should do is we should just cut our military budget in half. And we should enter into a deal with the Russians and the Chinese where they.
That was the best thing that Trump ever said, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Like
and
literally about the best.
Yeah. And tied with that was, and we should cut our nuclear weapons arsenals too. And what we want to do is, he says, he knew enough about it to say essentially, well, we and the Russians have many more than the Chinese do, but the Chinese are now building up. So what we want to do is we want to get them to stop and then make a deal with Russia where we get down to the same level as China. Like, man, it ain't Ron, but that might be Rand Paul talking right there. Like, that's pretty good, dude, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But again, he's got the imperial court in his ears telling him why, you know, that's impossible. But whenever he does talk about this, and I think this was in your question, this is what he's referring to, is, well, you know what? Well, fine. We'll let New START expire. And then I guess he hopes that that will, through fear, will inspire the Russians and the Chinese that, like, dang, if this is the only way that this guy will get into a treaty, then let's just go ahead and accommodate him and get into a treaty with him. And after all, especially if he means to put any actual cuts, any actual reductions in there to get America and Russia, if that's what it's going to take, and it very well might be, what it would take to get the Chinese interested would be a promise that we're going to reduce our stockpiles too. We're not just asking them to sacrifice and stay in an inferior position to us. We're sincere about getting down to the same level that they're at. They'll stop now, which the last I saw, they were like getting near 1,000 deployed nukes. Before, they had been at like 300. They had stayed at 200 to 300 since at least, I don't know, the 70s or 80s or whatever it was, that they got that many. And so it was only been in recent years that they've decided under Chairman Xi to build up. So, I'm absolutely against playing tough guy brinksmanship games with this unnecessarily, especially when we have this hot war on Russia's border. It's just, I don't think you need to do that. I think Trump could get he could stay in in New START, and then also propose a new treaty. Why not do that? Why not do it all in a spirit of friendship and cooperation instead of this brinksmanship stuff? It seems unnecessary to me. But I do hope that he's sincere in pursuing some new arms control, even if he has to have whatever kind of carve outs for whatever special interests are barking at him there,
Right. Only 5 minutes left. We have, Scott, the last question before we just get you to say whatever you want to promote yourself. Do you think that it's actually right-wing forces within Ukraine that Zelensky fears actually more than Putin that are holding his feet to the fire to keep this war going on, with the U.S. taking at least a step back and the Europeans, bearing the brunt of it in terms of the weapons delivery at this point to some extent? Do you think it's like it's right-wing forces that would have his head if he doesn't continue this war, and that's why he's being so averse to accepting any kind of peace deal?
Yes, I do think that. And it ain't just the Nazis, but as you know, Dave, there are real ass Hitler loving Nazis, severe all the way to the right wing nationalists that you can get, until you are Himmler. I mean, that's who these guys are. And Dmitry Yarosh and Andrei Beletsky are among the two more prominent and more powerful Nazis who have explicitly threatened to murder this president and his predecessor, Petro Poroshenko, if they would dare to negotiate with Russia. And even way back before all the current martyrs died in the war, we're talking even when Zelensky was brand new in 2019. And at that point, let's say 7,000 people had been killed on both sides in the war at that point. And when Zelensky came in, he ran on peace. And the German Foreign Minister Steinmeier introduced a new sort of order of operations for implementing the Minsk II deal and proposed that this could be a compromise between the Ukrainians and the Russians. And Zelensky was interested in it. And one, American Ambassador William Taylor told him not to do it. And two, the Nazis held massive rallies in Kiev and across the west of the country called the No to Capitulation rallies, where they said in no uncertain terms, we overthrew this government before, we can do it again. You want to die, negotiate with Vladimir Putin, the enemy, because we'll kill you for it. Simple as that. And in the name of the sunk cost fallacy, Dave, in the name of the guys who died in the war already have not died in vain, because we haven't lost yet. And if you give up, then they have, and you're the one who disgraced them. You're the one who made their sacrifice for nothing if you go ahead and compromise now.
Yeah, even after 1 million casualties by a lot of estimates on the Ukrainian side. You're totally right, Scott. I want to enforce the time. This was such a good conversation. So glad to have you. Outside of getting your amazing book on the Ukraine conflict and the run-up to it, Provoked, how can people support you that watch Liberty Vault and like what you have to say?
Cool. Well, thanks very much. Yeah. First of all, there's my books in the background. I see Enough Already on the Terror Wars, The Great Ron Paul. That's my interviews with Dr. Paul. And I guess you can't see the one next to that is Hotter Than the Sun is my interviews about nuclear weapons. And then back there somewhere is Fool's Errand about Afghanistan. That war's over, thank goodness. And then it's the Academy, man. This is the books in lecture form, me going through and telling you, look, there's a real purpose behind this, which is, essentially trying to train up a new generation of anti-war people who can start off knowing this stuff. Tom Woods calls it Scott Horton slowed down so everybody else can catch up. Right. And, it's almost like it reminds me of when I watch on YouTube, man, I see the young skateboarders these days, and they're so good because they're building on top of what has already been proven possible by generations and
like
generations
Rodney
of
Mullen
for them. That's right. And there's a 12-year-old kid that did a Ollie 720, no hands 720 the other day. And the thing is, there's just been dudes who've done Ollie 5s and a lot of dudes who've done 7s and whatever, enough that the precedent was set for this kid to get up there and do it. But anyway, point being that, look, so I'm the old guy here, right? I'm the old Mullen. I invented all this stuff. I didn't invent it. I wrote it all down for you. I got it all figured out. So everybody else can basically just catch up with me and then go from there. And then we got 1 million me's out there. And just like, what was Bill Kristol's speciality? The neoconservative speciality was creating, 15 think tanks all saying the same thing. And it's just him and his friends, right? And him and his 15 friends. Well, so what if we just do that, but we just have thousands of us who are essentially all caught up on Enough Already and Provoked and why we just don't have to do this stuff anymore. And then we're to the point where I'm superfluous. It doesn't matter if I get hit by a truck or take a vacation. Everybody else is out there holding down the anti-war, not just attitude, but the knowledge that it takes, the argumentation that it takes to defeat the war party. Their case is always based on lies. So if we know what we're talking about, then we'll always kick their ass. And so I think that's where we're at now. We're winning in the argument overall in the society anyway. So now we just need people really armed up with the facts. And so that's the purpose of the Academy. And again, people go sign up and use the promo code Liberty Vault, or just put in scotthortonacademy.com/Liberty Vault and we'll give you 10% off.
Right on, Scott. I'll get that URL from you, put it in the description, and all of my future videos, literally all of them, in hopes to help your cause. I believe in it that much. What you're doing is amazing. I really appreciate you as a friend too. So thanks for being here. We'll definitely do it again. So my demands against this criminal regime is no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Are you on board with that, Scott?
Absolutely right, man.
Right on, brother. Peace out. Love you, man. Let's do it again sometime.
You too.
Thanks for watching Liberty Vault with Dave Benner. Be sure to like and subscribe to help fight the Mockingbird algorithm. Click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And until next time,
no more war, no more debt, no more inflation,
And no more empire.